All right. Well, hello everyone. And today we have something very special, which is I get the opportunity to sit down with now I get to call him my friend, Andrew D. Meredith,
That's
who is the
me.
author of the Needle and Leaf books,
Hmm.
the Collation Saga, and then it's
The
not the quaint
Sideways Tales. Sideways
Sideways
Tales. Yeah.
Tales. There
Yeah.
we go. The Sideways
Yeah.
Tales. So Andrew, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll go on to what we're chatting about
Okay.
here
Well,
today.
I'm Andrew D. Meredith. I'm the author of Needle and Leaf, The Collation Saga, and Sideways Tales. I've been writing for uh, over 10 years. I've been publishing since 2022, and I'm at 7+ books right now, across those three series.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I am an indie author. So
There
I'm
you go. Yeah.
self published and loving it and writing across effectively three different subgenres, and it's been just a joy to um, explore those and be a part of the indie community.
Yeah, and be sure everybody watching this, in case you aren't already, follow Andrew on Instagram, Twitter, all the usual places that you'd find it. Because, well, I'll just be elusive and say there may be surprising and exciting news coming
Yes,
sooner than you think. So
yes,
you'll
and you can
want to
find
stay
me at
tuned for that.
Andrew D MTH, like Andrew D to the nth power, if it
Oh,
helps you
that's
remember it.
that's clever. Yeah. So Andrew, when do you? And I'll just kind of ask this as a preliminary
Yeah,
question. What's the first fantasy book you remember reading?
uh, Bulgariad.
And how old were you
Right,
when you read that?
I was 12 years old.
Okay.
So it was a
Okay.
long time ago. So that would have been in like 1994.
Wow, you're Andrew.
I'm
You're
I'm really old.
old.
I know it's all gray right here and creeping down. Yeah, I was 12 years old, and my dad had handed me Pawn of Prophecy, and I read that um, and obsessed and obsessed and obsessed about it for years.
Mhm.
And I the book 4 was the first book I had ever read in one day. Like I
Hmm.
stayed up until morning to finish the book, and so that was like my first big intro. And then right alongside that, the original Dragonlance trilogy.
Okay.
My dad and mom had like 40 of the books in the basement and said, "Start with these." It's as far as I ever really got was with those three. But the more I examine my own history, I realize how influential the Dragonlance as an idea formed like who I was. Like why do I love griffins more than dragons? I
Hmm.
thought it was Warcraft, not World of Warcraft, Warcraft the games. Yeah, Griffins, and those are great. But actually, before that, I was reading the Griffins in Dragonlance, and they were really big for that. There, did it hold? Do either of those series hold up for me today? Not at all. Um, uh, Dragonlance, it's enjoyable, and Raistlin, you want him to be, he's the perfect mage in so many ways, but I'm not sure if they hold up as well as I wished they had. But yeah.
Sure. Sure. And I actually realized before we get to the main topic and why I'm quizzing Andrew about his history here, I had a little because Andrew is one of the best dressed authors you'll come across.
Yes,
So
there we
I brought
go.
a
Good flat
actually
cap.
I can do this better here. All
There you go.
right. There we go.
Nice.
Brought my Newsies hat as well
Awesome.
to
Good job.
to
Well done.
match.
There's not enough of those in the world.
Oh, they're great. I was literally like digging in my closet, like, honey, do
That's
you
awesome.
remember where I put my super
Yeah,
suit?
this is my
Um,
newest one. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. So a part of why I wanted to get Andrew on here is he's obviously been reading in the fantasy genre for longer than I have, but also, as he alluded to, as a fantasy author, he's writing across three different types of fantasy that
Mhm.
are, at least for the two series of yours that I've uh caught up to date with, are very different from each other. Very different. And since you've been reading fantasy for so much longer than I have, yeah,
Yeah,
there's
that would
there's
be
the
your first read, I think.
yep.
And then Quaint Creatures.
There we go. Yeah, Quaint Creatures, which to date is my favorite. That one I just found to be particularly special. So, um, yeah. So since you write across a variety of
Hmm.
genres and have been observing the genre for longer than I have, and just through our chatting back and forth over text and voice messaging, I was like, man, Andrew has some really interesting thoughts when it comes to the way the genre has changed and evolved over time.
Hmm.
And we talked a little bit. I'm sure we'll get into it here about cycles within the genre. And so I wanted to have you on to talk about that a little bit. So I guess we'll start with this. So Andrew, there are fantasy authors that are like flash in the pan.
Right.
I remember this was even before I started reading fantasy, but when I first got on BookTube, and it was like, Murphy Napier and Daniel Green and Mike were like the only ones in the fantasy space anyone had heard of. And like I remember Brent Weeks was like, the hottest stuff in town. And like I still read Brent Weeks, but I'm like the only one who does now. Apologies to Mr. Weeks. I know he's a big fan of the show.
I won't tell him you said that. I might see him next week. I don't know him, but he's going to be at the show I'll be at.
That's right. Yeah, he's going to be at that. So yeah, no, I very much enjoy Brent Weeks' stuff. But just to say, like, he had a moment and it was really big. And like, I haven't seen him on a TBR in ages.
Right.
I mean, there's other authors that I could name. He just happened to be the easiest target that I could pick on here. So what do you think it is about? Well, and then there's other books, just to complete my thought here, that were even written back in the 90s or the 80s that are still well loved and still read, love it or hate it, like The Wheel of Time, even before the TV adaptation was announced, still very widely read, still loved. What do you think it takes for a fantasy series, especially, and this could be applied to broader literature since this is what you write and what I've been reading recently. What do you think it takes for a book to endure, to be something that's enduring and survive all of the various cycles and changes of the genre?
I think, a lot of it's luck, but that's not what we're here to talk about. I think a lot of it has to do with strength of the fandom, like how well does it and I wonder too if it has to do with maybe even how long it takes for a series to come out. Like you can take Wheel of Time, started in 1990 and finished 20 years later when Sanderson finished it off. So that crosses a breadth between two different generations of readers. So that means it has an opportunity to grab people from 1990 on, and then continue to grab people as it goes. So that would be a way to I guess generate a long-term fandom, but it also requires that a publisher's backing the book up, right? I mean, there's books that we're only just now discovering by accident through no fault of the author, but you could say by fault of the publisher. Like Janie Warts would be a great example of that, right? She's currently YouTube darling, and she was read and respected back in the 90s and the 80s. And then we didn't hear about her even on BookTube until recently. And then everybody's reading her because of BookTube, not because of the publishers. Or Christopher Rocchio is a great example of that too, right? That he openly admits that his career was set to flounder or die had BookTube not picked him up and said, buy his book, and everybody did. And now the publishers are backing him up. And so it's through no fault of his own, nor of you and I can argue his skill, right? Because he's such a good writer. But why was he set to flounder, and as opposed to Sanderson, and did Sanderson only become as big as he is because he finished Wheel of Time? He would say that's true too, but why? And so longevity comes from, again, the strength of the fandom, how much the publisher's backing it up, and then a lot of it's going to come down to the skill of the author, right? Like Van Gogh was not anybody until after he died, and there were those who would say he's the greatest artist that's ever lived. If you watch the Doctor Who episode, but he was not recognized as anything during his lifetime, and then he was adopted as the BookTube darling of the 1800s and became the 1900s, because I guess he was late 18, the painter of a century, and again, no fault of his own, because he was floundering in obscurity. So I think we're still you and I are going to discover books that we didn't know existed even in our lifetime 25 years from now, and that may be a book that will then be hailed as a Van Gogh of the 22nd century.
Yeah, it's interesting that you specifically point to like popularity over time and that being sustained, because there's this interesting thing that people will talk about, and I know you sent me a video about this actually, about the Tolkien imitators, after
Right.
Lord of the Rings, and how
Right.
do we duplicate? Just give us this. It doesn't matter if
Mhm.
it's watered down,
And
doesn't matter if it's all style, no substance, just more
right.
of that.
Right.
And what's
Print
funny
money.
is you would think that the author who would be primed for that, who would be hailed as the second coming of Tolkien, would be Guy Gavriel Kay,
Right.
because he helped edit or write the
Right.
Silmarillion and is
Right.
very tight-lipped about how much involvement
Right.
he had on it, which makes me suspect that it's protecting the professor more than anyone else,
Right.
just because of how tight-lipped he is on it, and then has been publishing like books for decades upon decades upon
Yeah.
decades,
Yeah.
is universally hailed as being a excellent author, and yet like I could ask my brothers who are massive Tolkien nerds, massive, and they have no idea who he is.
Mhm.
They've never heard of him. And one of the things is that Guy Gavriel Kay wrote, I think, a 5-book series at the early part of his career. But then since then, the most has been a duology. And
Mhm.
most of what he writes is standalones. And people don't follow authors as much as they follow series, you
Right.
know? And so I wonder if that plays a part in, because it's certainly not for lack of quality,
Right.
with an author like
No.
him, as far as his popularity
Yeah.
goes.
What do you think?
I think that's a part of it. I heard somebody on a video recently say, they were talking about their favorite fantasy books, and he said, and fantasy doesn't have a lot of standalones. And I almost like busted out laughing. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's more standalones than you can count, but they're not as famous. Because you don't have that anticipation, you don't have the hype of the next one. There's always
Right.
sort of a luck of the draw of like, is this going to be the mediocre one? Um,
Right.
and so people just tend to follow that less. I mean, you look at something like
Mm.
media tie-in series where you have dozens of different authors writing it. Like, I can't tell you who half of the authors in the New Jedi Order are, but
Right.
like I can recognize the books when I see them based on the series.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at something too like Discworld.
Hmm.
All standalones, but it's all Discworld. So
Hmm.
it's selling an intellectual property, an IP that's why you buy the next one.
Yeah.
And his skill carries him, and that's why like Guy Gavriel Kay is cherished by those who read him, is because you're getting a Guy Gavriel Kay book,
Hmm.
but he's almost more of a scholar. He's a scholar like Tolkien, but I think he enjoys those standalones, right? He enjoys those studies, those character studies. That's why he's able to help Silmarillion
Hmm.
and fix it, because he's able to focus in and fix the things that needed, whatever Christopher asked him to fix, right?
Hmm.
And whereas Tolkien was obsessed with doing the next thing. I mean, compare Tolkien to Lewis, right? I've been thinking a lot about the two of them, of just like that Lewis was such a discovery writer and Tolkien was an absolute planner. Even though at times I think you could argue like there's things where his discovery writing maybe weakened some points of his book that could have been strengthened up if someone had come along and said you need to fix it, and he
Hmm.
listened. That's the other thing, is if he had listened. But because I know Lewis was always pushing back on him and vice versa. But you read Lewis and you're like, if he hadn't written Narnia,
Hmm.
not a space series aside, if he had not written Narnia, would he have been as big as he was? Because he does have that block of a single book, and then everything else you read is because I need a little bit more. Because he's not going to give you more, even though he should have written 20 more Narnia books just to get more in-world build that he had done. But I think he was bored. He was bored by the end of that series. He wanted to do something new. And so yeah, I think that's a great point you make, is that the series provides a block, provides a block for the reader to move from.
Well, that's almost certainly true. What you say about would he have been as famous if he hadn't written Narnia, or at least would his other stuff be as well known? And the answer is almost certainly no. Because as you said that, I was like, that's interesting. If you remove Narnia from the equation, then suddenly, as people read the Space Trilogy, as
Mm-hmm.
people read Till We Have Faces, which is not my favorite book from him, but is arguably his best. Suddenly,
Great Divorce.
yeah, The
I
Great
mean, if
Divorce.
you and you start examining, you start realizing that even all of his fiction has an overarching theme of things he was working through.
Mhm.
Like that he wrote, you can see further up and further inside of the whole point of the end of Great Divorce.
Yeah.
It's further up and further in. It's like, okay, he was working on something here that he never, fully fleshed out, but he was working on it, theologically. But
they say that the Till We Have Faces is almost the novel version of The Four Loves by Lewis, which I need to read those two side by side again to make a definitive statement on that. But if you remove Narnia from his body of work, the interesting thing is now all of a sudden you read Space Trilogy, Till We Have Faces, Great Divorce, Screwtape. You read it through the lens of Lewis, the theologian, and like looking at it from him as an academic and as a spiritual teacher, and not reading Space Trilogy, and like suddenly it becomes almost like the Space Trilogy almost becomes less bizarre because you don't have the expectation of, but where are the beavers and where are the centaurs and where are the fawns?
Right. You too young to recognize that. The Fonz. The Fonz is a character from Happy Days, and he's anyway.
Yeah. So, but even you look at something like, so did Narnia and Lord of the Rings and other books like that, they just catch on because they were early to the game and not other people were doing this? Because I look at, even Robert E. Howard, as I understand, predates both Lewis and Tolkien, and a lot of other pulp writers do, and they're far less read. So what is it about those types of series or other authors who did similar
probably
things?
Oxford. It's probably because of Oxford. There's a legitimization that comes with what they wrote. I mean, it still took 40 plus years for professors to finally start teaching Tolkien, because it required that those kids who were told don't read that garbage grow up and say, I'm going to become a professor just so I can teach this to kids. And so I took a Tolkien class in college, and I'm sure you did too, with some professor who read it every single year of his life, and he wants to teach it because he's now old enough to tell the man that he was pushing against to shove it, and he can teach Tolkien finally, because they're from Oxford. Versus Ronnie Howard wrote pulp, and that's not legitimate, especially in terms of professors at college. And if the teachers who are teaching English in high school and in college are poo-pooing what's being studied, then what you read is just trash being read by these kids who don't know what real literature is. And so it becomes harder for it to become not a secret stash read you're reading at home. So I would imagine that's a part of it too. I suppose you could probably argue from the theological point of view too, is like, how well established was Ron Howard's theology, or was he still working through it with no basis? Versus Tolkien and Lewis came kind of with everything pre-baked, and then everything they build is off of the bake, as opposed to trying to find that answer. Same could be true of Dune, right? He's constantly trying to figure out what his theology is while he's writing it. But Dune has a beginning and an end. Even if there's more books, there's a beginning and end to his body of trilogy. That from there you can say, okay, at least this is Dune.
Yeah.
And it says everything it needs to say, and we can close the book and say, I read a book.
Right.
Like a Stephen King novel, right? You can finish a Stephen King novel and say there's no, except for, Dark Tower, there's no need to think about this book outside of itself.
Right.
Yeah, which Ronnie Howard was kind of all over the place, and so maybe that caused his readership to suffer for that reason.
And it's bizarre to me that we have, with sort of the two forefathers of fantasy, and I know that's being overly simplistic, but still, as fantasy is seen today, like Tolkien and Lewis are definitely like have made their deep unerasable marks upon the genre. So it's funny to me because you said these two professors at Oxford who are writing this stuff, but we don't see that anymore. Like I'm sure there are some, but we certainly don't see something of that size and popularity coming from the intelligentsia. It's almost like fantasy has come around and eaten its own tail again, is now just like the schlocky pulp again, at least in terms of a
Right.
lot of people's perception of
Yep.
that
Yeah.
level of education or what have you.
Yeah.
Is that a once in a multiverse type of just happy accident that these two guys happen to be at this point of time in history, or
I would wager so. Part of that could be from the fact that they came out of they came out of the war too, right? So they provided they provided a brand new thing, fantasy, even though I know there was fantasies beforehand, but they were providing something that was imaginative, coming just out of a era of very highly materialistic. You read your Hemingways, you read your Good Man is Hard to Find. You have the Depression in America and England, and then from there, out of there, we get fantasy, and that feeds that into the hope of the 60s and science fiction, going off from weird into Star Trek. And so I think it was a cusp. They were sitting on the correct cusp at the correct time. That doesn't mean we can't have a new cusp that can't occur, and I think we will. But what that will be, I don't know. Whether that's science fiction or fantasy or something we can't even imagine right now, because our nose is too close to the present to know what that will be. But
sure, yeah, that makes sense. I want to. It's a bit of a side tangent, but you mentioned it there, so I want to touch on it. I just love how like one tankard is done, and now it's the next one.
More water. Yep.
It'd be better if it was mead, but
I know I've got some downstairs, but it's not the right time for that.
Yeah, no, I kid here. Since you brought up that both Tolkien and Lewis fought in the war, I have been stewing on this for a while, because there is an argument that comes up in the fantasy genre of like, okay, like we have a responsibility, like there are big battles in fantasy, and we have a responsibility to like show violence and the true nature of war, like seriously, and we don't want to glorify it. We need to take it like seriously, like with a long dramatic pause, And I'm not saying that there's nothing to that, but what has struck me funny is that one of probably the most famous author who did this, who's like, I want to show that war is awful and gruesome and there's nothing heroic about it, is George Martin, who famously was a pacifist and I think a conscientious objector who stepped out of being drafted, which I'm not criticizing him for that. I'm just saying, like, this is the worldview he comes from. Joe Abercrombie is similar in terms of, he's not a military person. He didn't go and get shot at, and he writes war and battle in a very similar way. And Tolkien and Lewis, the ones who are accused of glorifying war, the ones who are accused of treating their battles very morally simplistically, are the ones who had their friends blown up in front of them and came home with, at least in some of their cases, like a head full of trauma, and like got shot at for king and country. And it's bizarre to me, and I could throw Gene Wolfe in there too. It's bizarre to me that that's the contrast. So I don't know. You seem like you had some thoughts on that.
Well, like what's funny is we say, well, they glorified war, yet all their battles are on paper battle plans and never described. Like the moment things are going to get good in the Battle of Five Armies, he knocks the main character out and wakes up later and post describes it. So, but I agree that they do glorify war in that they're glorifying the honor of a just war. And I think that's a call back to their own childhoods. That they went through World War I, which was the first total war, where they saw everything change. It was no longer glorified. It was no longer, there was no glory in war. They all marched off thinking that and walked back worse than any other war the world had ever seen, because everybody died. There was nobody spared. And so they spend, Tolkien spends a great deal of time dealing with the morality of a just war, but then juxtaposing it with Sam and Frodo as PTSD laden heroes wandering through a hellscape.
That's interesting.
Never fought. So they go through the swamps. They've not been through war, even though Frodo is suffering the PTSD of the ring, and Sam represents the non-PTSD'd. I forget what the term is, but there's a term when someone comes home without PTSD at all, but they have a great deal of guilt for not having PTSD, and that's been documented all the way back to World War I. Is someone coming back who is utterly cheerful about everything that happened because they're trying not to think about it, but they also don't wake up with the frights. They still saw that, and they're angry at themselves for not, because they're the survivor. So it's a bit of a survivor's guilt too, and that's what you see through Sam. The whole second and third book, even when home, and he's the only survivor who hasn't seen war, even though he's been through the worst of it just as much as Frodo is. Whereas I suppose you really argue that Lewis, though, he everything's kids play, so a lot of war is very you swing your sword at them and they fall down, and but he was writing to kids, so, and he understood that, I think, better than Tolkien did.
That's interesting. That's the funny thing that has always struck me is like, well, first of all, just in defense of the good professor here, is like every significant criticism that people have against Tolkien, from what I can tell, comes from people only reading The Lord of the Rings and like nothing else by him. Right. They haven't read the Silmarillion, they haven't read Children of Hurin, or at least they're not taking it into account when they make the arguments.
Which means they've never cried, right?
So one of the funny arguments that I hear against Tolkien specifically is that, like, oh, he wrote that generic traditional fantasy that all ends everything with a little bow and a happy ending. It's like even The Hobbit, which is a kid's book, ends with the dwarves making it to the mountain, but the king, the dwarf, spoilers for The Hobbit, everyone, but the king who's supposed to take back his throne dies, and not only does he die
after acting the fool.
Right, yeah. Not only does he die, but all of his last living kin die as well. And literally, this line of dwarves that has lasted for however long is wiped out. And then, and so like, there's that ending. And then Bilbo, after making it back home, gets home, and his house has been ransacked, and it's all being auctioned off. The end. It's
and
like,
all he has is a single chest of gold.
Yeah, it's like, wow. Yeah. That's your happy ending, really? Okay. And then obviously in Lord of the Rings, we can talk about the Scouring of the Shire, and Frodo has to leave, and all of that. So it's not to say that there's nothing happy about those endings, but it's always baffled me when people say, like, wow, what a real, like, cheerful note to end the story on, guys, Yeah.
Yeah, I think the two of them had a lot more to say about war than people give them credit for. But they're also avoiding it. I mean, that's why Tolkien didn't write Battle of the Five Armies, or Helm's Deep was, half a page, because he didn't really feel like reliving that. But he understands it's important to the story, so he wasn't completely skipping it. Yeah.
No, that's good. That's definitely true. That's interesting there. So, we've talked a bit about they kind of did something that's once in a lifetime. It's not necessarily something that can be recreated. But they also did something that's lasted for, we're coming up on, within our lifetimes. If the world stops itself from blowing itself apart before then, that it's they've started a genre that's lasted 100 years, and books that have been remembered for 100 years. We're coming up on that, and we are rapidly approaching. And like, you're an indie author, so you're in the space where authors that are established are going to be the ones who are primarily trusted, because you're not going to know what's been produced by a computer or by a robot and what's been produced by a human. So when we're talking about like fantasy or storytelling that endures, especially looking from your perspective as an indie author, what do you need to do? Like, we talked about series. Obviously, there's a lot of marketing stuff that you need to do, but look purely from the craft side of things, the storytelling side of things, what do you need to do to, as an author, to stand out and to write something that's going to last more than just the new boom? Because I got hype from a couple of big booktubers reviewing it, and then people forget 6 months later.
Right. I've been thinking about this a lot just in the last 48 hours since I sent you that one video by that that was talking about why Tolkien exploded and why the copycat showed up. And And thinking about back to Tolkien is that he was not trying to impress anybody. He did it for himself. And then also intended to publish because, of course, he got it published. And he knew how to get things published. He was already publishing stuff through journals, and so it wasn't like he wasn't a noob. He knew how to get things published, and he worked on it, and he made it work. But I think he was successful too because, and why he was copied is because he was doing it for himself. I say that because I think that's why we're probably going to see the next big Tolkien will come from indie. And I don't just say that as an indie trying to toot indie's horn, but you can argue. I'll be the first to argue that
he may even be in this room right now.
Right now, it's me. No, but Lord of the Rings, the movie, I will argue is one of the greatest, if not the greatest movie ever made. Unless you want to talk about Casablanca, but it was an indie as well because it was made by an indie filmmaker who did camp horror and then had a passion project, and he rode that horse all the way in, and he landed it, to mix metaphors. So, but because he has that passion, and when you watch the making of the Lord of the Rings, the passion that it is in all of the crew, that's from a small country that had some history of filmmaking from Hercules and a few other things that were starting to happen down there, but it's from New Zealand. So it's
Can anything good come out of New Zealand?
That's right, exactly. It's like Nazareth, but it shouldn't have worked.
Yeah,
but all the way to the music was what they were all nerds about it, and that's what I see happening in the indie space. Is yes, there are indies who are trying to write to market, and if you're in trad, of course you're writing to market because that's the only way to get it published.
Yeah.
But in the indie space, there's so many authors doing the thing they want to do. It's going to take one Christopher Rocchio. It's going to take one genius writer who has his idea that he just pulls off flawlessly. And that's why I think it'll come out of the blue. It's going to be one of those suddenly they will show up with the perfect book, and it won't be their fourth or fifth book. It'll somehow be a Rocchio situation where it's their first book and it's literal gold. And it's nothing like anything has ever read, yet it is. Because it's not trying to be. And I think that's where that's innovation. I mean, that's why and sometimes innovation is not 100% new. It's the rehash of the thing that failed. So I think we can be looking both forward and backwards to try to see where it's going to show up. Because like if you look at Apple, when I was a kid, my family was one of the few families in the world that used Apple because, why isn't this a PC? This is just so shiny. And it's like, yeah, but it's user friendly, but it's not Windows. And then they came out with the iPod based off of the failed Blueberries and BlackBerry. And the BlackBerry had tried to show up in technology, failed. And then Steve Jobs said, let's do that again. And he took the idea, stole the idea for the BlackBerry and launched the iPod that you could, write on, and boom, it became the biggest company in America. Because he took something that had not quite worked, but he knew was a good idea. And I think that's what's going to happen is we're going to see, Sanderson pulled it off. Sanderson took a weird idea of his own with Stormlight that took a few steps back, because his Stormlight failed, his first one he wrote Mistborn, and these things that were so out of the blue, different from everything else. It wasn't Forgotten Realms, it wasn't Wheel of Time, it wasn't George R. R. Martin. It was new. And I remember when I was introduced to Mistborn, it was because I was hating fantasy at the time. It was all the same to me, and I was being stupid. It was not true, but it just everything felt same to me, and I was reading historical fiction and other things outside of the genre, and then someone handed me Mistborn, and it blew my mind. It was like, this is what we've been waiting for. And so you could argue that he was a Tolkien in that sense, because he showed up out of nowhere with these new ideas and then took off running and made an empire out of it.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Well, because I'm gonna I'm going to touch on a couple things that you said there. The first is the reusing of older ideas, and then so that's the first thing. And then I'm going to talk about indie, so I don't want to forget that. But the reusing of old ideas, in a sense, that's what Tolkien and Lewis both did. You know, Tolkien obviously, like, there's a lot of, like, even Beowulf, you know, in the
Nibelung.
Hobbit. There's a lot of I haven't read them, but Lord Dunsany and William Morris, people say, you know, big influences on Tolkien. And then the one that I can speak to is the huge influence that George MacDonald was on C.S. Lewis. So much so that C.S. Lewis described him as his master.
Right.
And that, what is the line that he said? He said he didn't think he had written a book where he hadn't quoted MacDonald on every page. Is I believe what he said, which I'm sure is hyperbole, but still. If you haven't read, have you read much? Now I'm just personally asking,
he's Princess and the Goblin.
Yeah.
I grew up reading those.
Yeah. Did you ever read At the Back of the North Wind?
That's book 3, right?
No, it's completely separate. It's its own thing.
Okay. No.
Yeah. No, At the Back of the North Wind is it's a trip. So if you ever feel like reading something that's like best way to describe it is probably like a ghost story about God. It's bizarre, as you'd expect. So there's that of, like, that's sort of what Tolkien and Lewis are even doing, you know. But then on the indie scene, you said they're doing things that you can't do in other places, or you can't do in trad publishing. And I'll pick on actually a friend of yours, which is Tori Tekken with Cold Silver for Souls.
Right.
I mean, like, who are you going to pitch? You know, necromancer, Western bounty hunter, fighting off ghosts, and also like child abusers,
and not campy.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Taken very seriously.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because just saying, like, the pitch that people use for it of, like, necromancy, Western bounty hunter, like, it is pitched as a campy book.
Right.
But the book takes itself very seriously.
Right.
You know, in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's because she took the genre. She didn't just take other fantasy westerns and said, I'm going to do that. She said, I'm going to do the westerns I like, but also with necromancy, and then create the story I wished I could read. And that's where a lot of that comes from. And it's not to say that that's not what they're doing in trad as well. And that's how you become an author in the first place. It's just more likely that trad's going to pick you up if you stay in the lane and deliver something that's in the lane. The weird ones that end up going indie to trad are ones that are an anomaly, and they buy them out. Like Rage of Dragons was pulled over into trad because it was an anomaly, and it exploded, and so they tried to nab them up. Or same with Legends of Montes, Senlin too. And because I read some other fantasy westerns, even trad ones like Buntline Special. I read I think 4 books in that series, and it's super campy western where, you know, Edison shows up in Tombstone and builds a force field armor for Wyatt Earp so he can get into a gunfight. And in book 4, Crazy Horse, who's a shaman, summons dinosaurs up from from Utah, because that's where all the bones are, and basically uses them as the land reacting to the white people, and summons undead dinosaurs to attack. So super campy, stupid, and it was a blast. It's not what Tori wrote, and I'm so glad for that, because she gave us a true grit. It's funny, not even as it's darker than her favorite western, which is Young Guns, and which can be campy as well in a 90s sense, and I don't get that tone at all when you read the book.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons, you know, and I said earlier this year that I wanted to try to do 2 things each month. I wanted to try to read one piece of classic literature, because I've fallen off on that, and boy did I drop the ball on that. It's been like 3 months since I've picked up one, so whoops, guys. But the second one, which I've done much better at, is I said I wanted to read indie fantasy novel, which is how I began reading books by our lovely guest here. But that's kind of where it started, and this is a piece of advice that Philip Chase gave me, because this is largely why I bounced off of The Wheel of Time after being 6 books into it, is I felt like after 6 books, I'm not even halfway through, and I feel like we are, pun intended, spinning our wheels here.
Mhm.
I'm getting the same thing. It seems like in many books, we are literally having the characters end up in the exact same space. And as a reader, I found that to be very frustrating.
Yeah.
Some readers love that. It's like it's not in the genre sense of the word, but in terms of the emotion, it's cozy for them. It's familiar, safe. For me, that's not what I'm looking for. I want an author who's going to be doing something different every few books. I've heard like Adrian Tchaikovsky does this. I'm like, oh man, so now he's on my radar too. But Philip Chase gave the piece of advice of what you're looking for is probably going to be an indie fantasy, which was encouragement for me to double down as well, because they're going to do things there that aren't done. I mean, the example that everyone will know is Sword of Kaigen, that there's things done with the structure of the book that you can't do in trad.
So, I would throw in JCM Byrne as a great example too, because he's done something that shouldn't be done, and that was to write a book about superheroes. And that's just you don't do that. And there is a lot of indie superhero books out there, but his stands alone, I think, because of his maturity. Though he would say he's immature, and I agree, he is immature at times. But we're friends. But he wrote a superhero book that he wanted to read. He couldn't, and it was kind of I'm not an artist. I can't afford an artist, but he has 50 plus years of experience as a comic book reader to draw from, to tell the story. So he has a lot of stuff in his head that he can work from. But that also, that also creates a problem for younger generations. So JCM is a generation above me, but we millennials and Zs have one major crutch that we have to fall back on, and that is that we have too much in our heads. I mean, I remember analog and playing video games on NES where we had to actually grind through and finish games, and then like Game Genie came out, and you could look up how to win the game. And so it's become easier and easier and easier. And so games have to be easier because we get bored with the frustration. And I think that also causes all of us to freeze up in our accomplishments when we can't do it right the first time. And when you have too much in your head, there's too much to draw from, and so you never get around to actually doing it. And so I mean here's the middle of the show advice, is that stop thinking and just do it. You can't, if you spend world building syndrome. It's why, like, I would never suggest people take the amount of time I did to world build the Collation saga before writing the book, because it's too much. And in the end, the more I write it, I realize how little I had actually done. I thought I had written a whole bunch of world building, and it turns out it was all vapid smoke in the wind. And you have to just get going, because if you spend too much time analyzing your process and how you're going to do things, you'll never get it done. So you have to set yourself goals and actually get going. And I think that's what JC, I mean, Byrne talks about how he's got other books he wrote decades ago that we'll never see. So he had that time to develop himself as a writer. So we're really seeing, Butterfly Joe, not Caterpillar Joe. You could tell him I called him that. But he did write. He did write something back then, and that's the important thing, I think, as writers, is we have to get writing as fast as possible, so that we can learn how to be a better butterfly.
And that's also, like, this is what Christopher Rocchio has said is sort of, in his mind, one of the antidotes to the AI problem, is that there are a lot of readers who will read a book because it's from you. So like for him, there's a lot of people who will read. Well, here's a great example. How many times, like, stop me if you've heard this before, that somebody is not interested in reading Never Flinch, but they've read every Stephen King book since the 80s, and it's another crappy Holly novel, but because they've read all of them, they're going to read this one too. And so one of the ways that he said that a lot of authors are going to survive whatever's the AI apocalypse that's coming is just that, having readers who trust you and want books from you. And that actually, if you spit all 4 of your books in the Collation saga into some AI prompt, and
Right.
it will give and ask it for you to write Collation Book 5. It won't do that. It will
No.
actually just give you a book that is digested parts from the 4 that you've given it, but it's not going to give you wherever the story is going to go next. It actually can't predict that because it's actually not Andrew D. Meredith. I don't know if you knew that, but it's not. So
I mean, we are a better computer anyway, because we can guess the future. So I mean, AI today is not brethren of Rocchio's world that can guess things out into the future in a million different ways. And so to the discovery writer, we are building off of everything we've got, but also constantly building new synapses that will move things forward. Or in my case, I set up my pins for my bowling game, and then I let it crash. But I do a ton of prep work before I start any book that I write, even if I'm discovery writing it. So it wasn't quite as true with Quaint Creatures, but I also had a lot I was drawing off of inspiration wise that I had been waiting for 2 years, so that when I did it, my processor was already ready to do it. So I think the other tool against AI is the plan. Is making yourself the plan, and knowing and also throwing wrenches into your own ideas that AI couldn't solve it if it wanted. Like if you say, I'm going to write, to pick on Joe again, I'm going to write a superhero who's a tow truck driver in space. Oh, and he's a war hero too. Okay.
Yeah.
AI is going to just talk about tow truck driving the whole time, or just about the war, and just forget after a couple of lines that he was ever a tow truck driver. But that's part of his character. And so and we as humans think that way, where we know how to do callbacks, and all it can do is fetter in and write an outline that follows the hero cycle. And if you say, but can you concentrate on the 6th step? It's like, okay, the rest of the book is the 6th step, and then I'm going to tell the last 4 steps in the last chapter. It's like, no. I don't ever want you to get to 10. I want you to just do 6. Yeah, but there's 10. Like, okay, sit down, Chat GPT. You're being stupid. I want you just to go to 6. Yeah, but what about 7 through 10? You're like, it can't do it. It can't. I was playing around with it one day because I was in a bad mood, and I was playing around with it, and you start playing with it, like, oh, it's doing all these cool things, and you realize, oh, nope, it's just rehashing. And whenever you try to tell it, you can't just tell it, I want you to do this one thing. You have to literally act like a program and go back and say, and not X, not Y, not Z, not A, not B, not C, remove all those, and then it will still go back and do D. You're like, no, okay, we're past that. So it cannot process the way that we process naturally.
Yeah.
Because we're just better made in that sense.
You can even look in a writing sense, to allude back to what you were mentioning a second ago. At the end of Howling Dark, this isn't really a spoiler, I'll just speak structurally of what Rocchio does. He writes himself into a corner. He writes himself into a corner that you have to break the rules of, as an AI, you'd have to break the rules of writing in order to get out of the problem that he creates for himself. But Rocchio writes an answer that is brilliant because guess what? He's a writer with a soul. And that's something that AI doesn't have. And so he can come up with an answer that completely works, is, I think, very satisfying. That like every friend that I've recommended the Sun Eater books to is like texting me as soon as Howling Dark is over because of the ending of it. And that's not something that you'll get just by putting it into it. Like, how do you solve for this problem that I came up with in the story now?
Yeah, I've long said, I think even before the AI problem, people were just talking about AI like 10 years ago. I was like, it cannot reproduce us because it is only binary. And we are we're quadrary because our DNA is GCTA. So we have 4 different binary codes instead of just 2. And I don't even know how you'd program a trinary system. But even if programmers could say we're going to have a trinary system, and I don't know what that would, and I don't know what that would be, where you have your on-off switch and then something else. But our DNA is a 3-dimensional. Even they're even realizing that DNA is actually 4th dimensional, because it can remember, it has memory. So you can have, like, in the same way that you, like, they'll do tests with mice and they've chopped, mice has lost its tail. Its children will have shorter tails because which shouldn't make sense, because you'd think, okay, the sperm of that mouse should still have the DNA from it having a tail, because that's just innate, right? It's like, no, it thinks back, and they've watched like helixes of DNA touch backwards. So where the code sits on the lattice of code actually matters and changes, which means that trauma affects DNA. So it actually has a fourth dimensional or a one-dimensional time or two-dimensional time aspect to it as well. So it's like DNA is weird, and it's like, so it can at best emulate us, but because it cannot have a third or fourth line of code type, it can't ever be us. It can only emulate it. Which is why it requires you need a planet-sized brain in order to process something that much.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So I've been thinking about just to bring it back to the indie stuff as well. With what makes certain indie authors succeed and other ones fail. And one topic that's come up, and this comes up only just because our world, and as it seems, at least rationally, it looks like it's going to hell in a handbasket. There comes up this question. It comes up on book Twitter every once in a while, and then we'll make this circuit on BookTube and whatever. Like, should fantasy books be political or not? And then the people who get really smart like twirl their mustache and say, actually, all books are political. And so there's a couple of different thoughts that I have on this, but I guess I'll just prompt you on this. If we're talking about books that endure and have longevity, and hopefully, like you should want to write a book that people will read in 100 years, even if it doesn't. Like, that should be your goal, is to write something that people will remember for that long. With that being your goal, should you lean into political or topical questions or avoid it?
I think that depends on the author and what you're trying to accomplish with your books, whether you are trying to accomplish something or not, right? Tolkien was not trying to accomplish political statements. He was trying to write a history. That does not mean that his personal beliefs did not bleed into it, because you cannot help but do so.
Yeah.
AI can't do that. You could tell AI to write Wheel of Time or Lord of the Rings with 0x theme, and the theme would be removed. So, I mean, there's intentional themes and unspoken themes. So you can't, in that sense, everything's political, because your personal beliefs are going to come through. You may not notice that, and even the people closest to you might not notice that, but others might notice that 100 years from now. So if your goal is to make a political statement, George Orwell, then he could only have hoped that his books would eventually be obsolete, because he was making a political statement, and if he's lucky, it will teach the future, and the future will not become what he wrote, and we don't have Animal Farm or 1984 now. So, and that could be 100 years from now. People may only examine Orwell as, look, he predicted it and it happened, and we've learned since then. But that's the point of a book like that, of a satire like that, is to write a political statement. Same could be said of Ayn Rand's books. But you don't have to. I mean, you can, and people are always going to see it anyway. Even if you were to write a book that said, I'm going to write about, Temujin's invasion of China, people are going to say, oh, well, that's the time when Mexico and America had a war. I can see it. It's right there. It's obvious. And it's like, it's about Temujin before he becomes Khan. Come on. And it's like, but did I, before I wrote that book about Temujin, I haven't, have a huge obsession with the Spanish-American War of 150 years ago? That, okay, maybe the readers are right, and I did let that bleed through. So you can't help but let certain things bleed through. Your political views are probably going to bleed through. but that doesn't mean you can't also be a responsible author and examine your opposition so that your characters are more real. I mean, that's what it comes down to, at least for me, is making sure that I'm writing characters who are real. Whether I disagree or agree with their points of view, I don't want straw men in my books. And so, and other times I do want straw men because I want an argument and I want somebody to look like an idiot.
Sure.
And so I'm going to give them the straw man side of the argument. But that's not, that's by design. But that doesn't mean that there's times when I will fail, because I will. We all fail. Even Rockio.
Yeah, well, I think the statement that all art is political, it could be equally applied to say like all art is religious.
Right.
You know, it's like, okay,
Right.
like sure, I guess in some like grand sense, but like yeah, I'm trying to think of what a good, like Robert E. Howard, since we were talking about him earlier. Like you read the Conan stories and it's like, okay, like there's not much deep spiritually that Howard is trying to say in these. It's more like big guy swing sword. Like that's what.
Well, Dune would be a great example of that too, in that he failed in his goal for his theme. Is that his goal was to show, prepare for this jihad, write a terrible human being as a main character so you'd hate him, and oops, everybody loved Paul. And he had spent 2 more books just trying to ruin Paul because people loved Paul from book 1. It's like, because you wrote a great story. Just lean into it, man. You don't have to go back and fix this. But that was his goal. And so then you get people like Rocky or others who are like, no, let's write a hero and not subvert it. Let's not subvert the hero. Instead, write them as a human being or whatever. And so, he tried to write political and accomplished it by accidentally failing. And because of that, wrote a book that ended up lasting now we're 60 years for that one.
Yeah. Because I think there can be at least I know I found for myself, there were times where I thought, like, oh, well, if you write to any type of political idea or statement that you're trying to make, you're grounding it in the times and it's not going to endure. And I think people like George Orwell and like lover or hater, like Ayn Rand is still very much read today. Right. I think those people probably prove my at least initial thought a little bit wrong, but there's a certain element to it where it's like, okay, people still watch movies from, we'll take Casablanca, which definitely has some political undertones to it, or Citizen Kane, which is explicitly a political movie. But like, who's going back and watching I forgot the director's name, but the Christian Bale movie Vice about Dick Cheney? Like, when's the last time you heard one of your buddies be like, you know what? We sat down and we watched Vice. Great movie. Or even like the Ronald Reagan movie from 2 years ago. Does anyone even remember that there was a Ronald Reagan movie from 2 years ago? It's like, it's of the moment, flash in the pan. Everyone's talking about Dick Cheney again for a couple of months, and then, it's gone. Whereas I still own like La La Land from like 8 years ago and watched that, and then that endures. Like, we love Casablanca. Anyway.
I think that's probably a to market thing, right? That Vice or Reagan is a to market thing, right? Situation. Whereas sometimes you get a director who will subvert that so well. Like I watched a video about Dewey Cox story, which I've never even seen, but it was like it popped up on my feed and I was watching it and it was like it actually ruined the biopic for everybody. Because biopics have always been made where they do a biopic about Freddie Mercury, which is great movie, or the one about Elton John, and then Dewey Cox came along and they said, we're going to film it with as much seriousness as a normal biopic about a completely fake character, and all the jokes, nobody's laughing because there's no laugh track, and so you end up with this. Basically them saying, we understand what you're doing. You're manipulating the people to watch these biopics and we're going to just mock it. And it did a really good satire because of that. So and I think we're seeing that with like Dungeon Crawler Carl is that it's taking and putting all these, I haven't read it yet, but I know it's, takes very serious, but also very camp, very, almost Hitchhiker's Guide, but more so like Guardians of the Galaxy. And taking that style of humor and pulling it off in a satire against Trad Publishing. And who picked them up? He's getting published by Trad Publishing because it's that big, because he's subverting so many tropes.
Yeah.
So,
well,
personality is important.
I have almost with religious fervor a determination to not read Dungeon Crawler Carl just because everyone wants me to. It's like Michael from The Office, stop dating my mother. I'm going to date her harder. It's like, I'm not going to read it even harder.
Yep.
And my prediction is that you give it like 6 or 7 years, and I wonder if it's going to be as popular as it is now. Because I don't know. Maybe he's a genius.
I think the same is true for Cozy. I don't know that Cozy's here to stay. I think it's here to sit for a while, and that's why I'm enjoying writing in it now. But 10 years from now, we're going to see the thing that Cozy led to. And Dungeon Crawler Carl might not be around, but either he will be writing something else, and he hit his actual famous book kind of thing, or somebody else is going to pick up the banner and run with it to something new. It's I don't know if you've ever read like up on like bellwether theory. So a bellwether is like the castrated with a bell on it sheep that stays with the shepherd, and they castrate them and then treat them as their buddy. And so they don't act like a normal sheep; they act like a shepherd. And so they hang out with the shepherd, and so then they put the bell on, and then the sheep learn to follow the sound of the bell or the shepherd's voice, and so you end up with this. As long as you can keep the docile bellwether. Anyway, the point of a bellwether is that it's something that leads people. But in bellwether theory, which Connie Willis wrote a whole book on it, is that a bellwether is somebody who starts a fashion statement, but the bellwether is not who you think it is. So it's not because Billie Eilish dyed her hair green and black, girls are dyeing their hair green and black. It was actually somebody in a small town in Kentucky that when Billie Eilish was driving by on a bus, she saw that, and then 2 months later, on a whim, subconsciously dyed her hair green and black. The real bellwether is actually that girl in a small town in Kentucky. And so bellwether theory is the whole idea that you can't ever guess what's going to happen. It will just happen. Or like if you look at like historical war theory, like they talk about when you look back, you can see the cause of a war, like World War I, but that doesn't mean it had to be the cause of the war. World War I was caused because they shot Ferdinand. But there were 20 other events that were occurring at the exact month. Any one of those could have been the bellwether that started the war. It just happened to be Ferdinand was the shot heard around the world. Same with writing. We don't know what's coming. Cozy kind of showed up out of nowhere because it did, and that's because of COVID happened and people were tired of COVID, but they also liked kind of sitting at home. So Cozy worked. But that doesn't mean that Cozy is going to be the big thing. It might just be the precursor to the actual big thing.
So like a media example that would probably be pretty famous is you look at something like The Matrix, which like for 20 years afterwards, everybody's copying The Matrix, everybody's got, those slow-mo fight scenes and stuff, and it's parodied in Shrek. But obviously if Nichols' amount of sci-fi, that the Wachowskis are recycling a bunch of ideas in their stuff that come out of that. So is that like sort of the idea?
Yeah, well, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy would be a great example of that too, is that he was taking what Joss Whedon did in Avengers and turned it way up to 11, pushed it all the way to the max, and the first Guardians is hilarious. And then Marvel said, oh, it worked. We should do this 50 more times. And they tried to make every Marvel movie for 3, 4, 5 years another Guardians of the Galaxy with the same humor, and it's quickly people were just like, we're so done with this.
You have like Thor: Love and Thunder, which like is insufferable, like
yeah, exactly. And it was just too much, and so it was too much of a good thing.
Yeah,
but then someone right now is writing a screenplay that's going to fix it. It's going to take that and say, here's funny. And you're going to get not the Taika Waititi, but something other than him that will be even better. And he'll look at it and go, oh, why didn't I think of that? But he was a bellwether, but he's kind of building off of what Joss Whedon had done in Avengers, who's building off of his whole career of writing. And he had to workshop that. And where did he get it from? It all goes back. But you can't really know. Who knew Guardians would work? It shouldn't have. Even just watching the preview, you're like, I don't know about this, and then it was comic gold.
Well, I was listening because Superman's coming out. I was listening.
Yeah.
I've been listening to some James Gunn interviews,
Yeah.
and he even said like he almost passed on it when they offered it to him. He's like, I don't even like these characters. There's no way the talking tree really, guys, we're doing this, you know. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now,
You kind of wonder if a bit of that irreverence came from his disdain for the characters. Like I'm gonna put these characters through the ringer, and they came back and said, "Try us." And he's like, "Okay, I like the cut of your jib. Let's do this." And as a writer, when you have characters who will interact with you that way on the page, it's so satisfying, including characters you hate, and then they keep asking for scenes, and so you give them scenes, and
So as an author who writes explicitly cozy fantasy, and then Needle and Leaf is not cozy fantasy, but I would say it's adjacent in the sense of, you know, like The Name of the Wind, you know, is called cozy fantasy adjacent, or The Hobbit, you know, and I'd say Needle and Leaf is of a similar vein. Do you have a suspicion as to where it's leading?
I don't know yet. So it's to talk about like the cycles of writing, where we're leaving a grimdark era into what I think is a noble dark era. We're heading towards noble bright, which cozy emulates a little bit, and a lot of people just hate the concept of noble bright, like just despise it. They cannot possibly comprehend how you could ever want to read My Little Pony as a fantasy. And it's like, okay, yes, but that's very ham-fisted to think that way. We're not going to get My Little Pony. We're going to get Star Trek, which I get that the 80s and on, not Next Generation, but the original, there's so much of a pushback against. We don't want that feel of naive hope. But we've left so far behind, we can't know how to write that until we're there. So again, it's I feel strongly that we will be heading towards not the cozy we're seeing now, but something that is more in the noble bright vein of there is hope and good will win. But I also know that we have a much larger breadth of literature to draw from, so there's going to be better nuance, and that's what I look forward to. I mean, you could look even at comparing Lord of the Rings book to the movie, is that there's nuance that was put into the movies that the books didn't have, because he had that much more time and space and video versus words to do so, that you could put nuance in that you cannot capture on book.
I'm not saying at all that this makes him a better character, but Peter Jackson writes, I should say, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens write Aragorn very differently than Tolkien does. It's noticeably the same character. He does essentially the same things, but the reasons for why he does it is a lot less Christ-like and much more human. Even though he basically looks.
And like I know people I've seen lambasting of that online, that he's a weaker character because of that, and I disagree. Because while he is a stand-in for a Christ figure, he is not Christ. And he is supposed to represent the human seeking of the ideal. And that requires that he makes the human sacrifice against all logic to go into the paths of the dead. He at that point he is finally, and I know that one of the arguments for that is that early in the story I'm going to be king, like from the beginning, and it's like, okay, but that's not how, even in the book, it's not quite how it's written. The whole point is he still has to go through the steps and follow the prompting of the path that's been set for him. He has almost no agency until he goes on the paths of the dead.
That's right.
And I think,
that's interesting. That's very interesting.
It's just, he just has to follow this is the path. You go there. And then once he gets there, he has to choose Path of the Dead. But in the movies, from the get-go, he's being told, you need to go and be king. And he's like, I don't know. And so you get to see that the very, very real fear of what if he has the same problem that his ancestor 2,500 years ago had. It'd be like us. It'd be like me knowing I'm related to Achilles and worrying about my heel still. It's unreasonable, but it also is reasonable because Aragorn understands the flaws of man better than any human in the whole book.
When in a very
In the
human
movie.
sense, how many of you guys, or how many men watching this, and maybe it applies to women too, but I'll speak as a man, have looked at your dad and said, I don't want to do X thing that my dad did.
Right.
I've never met a guy who didn't say that.
And a good dad should want you to think that.
Yeah, exactly.
It should want you to think, how can you improve upon what I've started?
Mm-hmm.
It's that's just a good father. And a wise son will look at their father and say, here's what I'm not going to do. But also there's things you're like, yeah, I understand why he chose that tack to punish me. He was justified. I get why he made me weed. I'm never weeding again, but I get it. And we can look back at that and say, but what can I learn from that?
Yeah.
And I just rewatched all of them again, and I still love it.
Well, let me go on one side tangent here briefly, since we're talking about Lord of the Rings. I wish the movies had done this, Andrew. This is my one flaw with both.
Tom Bombadil.
Well, no. So don't worry. This is not Tom Bombadil or Scouring the Shire. I've actually never heard another Tolkien fan say this, but I don't necessarily need it in the books. But in the movies specifically, with how much emphasis they put on Boromir as a character and the relationship between Boromir and Aragorn in movie 1, and then the emphasis they put on the contrast between Boromir and Faramir in movie 3, it didn't need to be long, but I wanted even 30 seconds of a memorial or a moment of silence of remembering the one member of the Fellowship who actually doesn't make it at the end of the series, when they're tying everything up in
like a statue or something.
Yeah, like I've never heard anybody say that before, but that's like my one thing where I'm like, man, that would have been so fitting.
Yeah. That was the other critique I don't like seeing, is when people don't like Faramir in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
They think they weakened him considerably because he almost gives into the ring, and in the book he never gives into the ring. And it's like, I think Tolkien missed a step in the books on that. That's the point. That's the point that Aragorn and Gandalf understand, is that man will fall to the ring. And the books, Faramir just like, oh yeah, go ahead. I'm good. I'm too good for that. It's like the juxtaposition of Boromir to Faramir and the shadow that he is forced to live under is so real to so many people that Faramir is one of my favorite characters. And I think it's one of that actor's best roles he's ever played too. Comparing,
we could say that of most actors in the Lord of the Rings movies.
That's true. Oh, though Éomer's rendition of Dread is pretty darn good.
I've yet to see it. I think I watched like the first like 10-20 minutes and was like,
not
sick.
The Sylvester Stallone one.
So I was like sick or something and like turned it off because I wasn't feeling good. But no, I need to get back to that. No, that's really interesting, huh? How much? Well, we'll end the plane here pretty soon. But I'll say this, since you're a very well-read man yourself, how much would you say? Because Tolkien and Lewis famously are not drawing from sword and sorcery just from other fantasy books. They have a breadth of history, theology, having read like every other book out there that they're drawing from and pulling from when they're writing these novels. And one of the criticisms that people say is like, that's what Tolkien is regurgitating, and Terry Brooks is just regurgitating Tolkien. Like that's the only tradition he draws from. So as an indie author, how important is it to know more than just fantasy as a genre in order to write something that's lasting and will endure more than just the current moment?
Very. I think it's very important. Everybody should be reading outside their genre. I'm glad that I went through I needed to read historical fiction phase, and switched out and read a few of the only horrors I've ever read and enjoyed them. But I'm good now. Done that. But I think there's an intentionality as an author you can take to examine what you want to cross-reference with. So like if you say, well, I want to write a procedural mystery, because I watch a lot of procedural mysteries, but you're going to be writing a fantasy procedural mystery. One, see if there are any other fantasy procedural mysteries out there, but also read books that are procedural mysteries so that you can understand how they write those books. Because a book is very different from a movie, right? If you love a heist movies are fantastic because they do really well in that medium. How many heists are you reading so that you can write a heist in the style that will be,
like Sneakers, right?
Like Sneakers. Yeah, don't watch Sneakers. But so I take that from. I was an artist before I was a writer. So back in high school and college, I thought I was going to be an artist. And one of the things that artists do that authors don't do as much is copy the masters that you enjoy. So I had comic book artists I absolutely loved, and I had panels I loved, and I would redraw the same panel 100 times and then put my own characters over the same panels and then use that as a means to kind of absorb parts of their style into my own. Because we are all made up of the styles that we absorb. As a reader, all the books you read can inform what you write because you're absorbing those styles. But I've heard, fanfic is one way to do that, where you can literally sit and just fanfic in your favorite world. But I've heard of authors who will take their favorite author and then hand write or type one whole page of that author's work and then continue to write. So they're not necessarily right. Yeah, they're not just writing like the books. They could take a Stephen King novel, write the first page down. They're not trying to retell it, but they write the first page and then just keep writing. And what you do is you start to absorb their voice. That is not because you're trying to become a ghostwriter for them, which you could. It's not that you're trying to rip them off and write in the Stephen King style, but by doing that and then setting that aside and doing your own thing, you'll slowly start to actually absorb voice from around you. And that's a completely legitimate way of doing it without AI. Because AI, I doubt, could pull in 5 references from 5 different authors and try to be all 5. If you say, I want you to write James Patterson, Stephen King, and Robin Hobb, they're going to say, oh, you like Robin Hobb? And they're just going to copy Robin Hobb. The AI can't pull all of it in, whereas you will start internalizing those brush strokes of the artists that you want to emulate.
Because ultimately it's all filtered through you,
right?
Which is different.
Artists have been doing it since Michelangelo and before. You weren't allowed to paint your own paintings. Your job was to literally watch your master paint, copy his painting, and then he swat you with a stick until you got it right. And Michelangelo, and there's paintings they found from Leonardo and Michelangelo of their masters' paintings that they copied, and you start to see as they get older, it's starting to look like Michelangelo and less like the artist that they're copying. And so why are we not doing the same? Why are we so afraid that our kids are writing fanfic? Well, we're afraid they're going on the wrong forums, but we do want them to emulate goodness, and it's not just from reading. Yes, you have to read in order to write, but you also have to write in order to write. And the earlier we can get kids and young writers to start doing that, the sooner they can outgrow that and start writing their own stuff.
As an indie author, and we'll kind of wrap it up with this, what are you trying to do with all 3 series that you're working on now that you either don't see done in the fantasy genre as a whole, and what do you think you're doing that will make people still want to read the books, hopefully in 20, 30, 50, and 100 years?
Lots of world building with 0 info dumping. That's what I'm trying to do. And often it became an obsession of mine very early on. And because people have said I'm doing it well, it now becomes more of an obsession to not ever wreck that. And so you will find a lot of world building in what I'm writing, but without info dumping. And I talk about that a lot online with people is how can you avoid info dumping? Because I'm tired of reading info dumps. I don't like reading them either because I get bored. It feels like an AI, regurgitating at you that's giving you all this information you don't need. And so that's
like
a trope.
homework.
Exactly. So that's a trope I like to both play with, and sometimes I info dump because it's fun and it's funny. So that's something I'm trying to do. But I'm also just trying to write people who could walk out of the page. So I avoid two-dimensionality. I avoid, I don't know, tropes. Yeah, that's not a very good answer.
Well, hey, it's good enough for sure.
Yeah.
For this. I'll definitely be linking your website down below, so people can find you there. And we already talked about your social media. Anything else you want to share about either your writing or what you have coming up, or anything else? I know some stuff's still under wraps, but anything you do want to just let people know before we sign off here?
Start reading this now because I'll be finishing it early next year. Third book will come out, and that'll be the last book of these two characters' story. Someday I might revisit, but that's the end of their story. And the Collation Saga, you can read the first whole arc now. Deathless Beast, Bone Shroud, Gloves of Eons, Dread Knight. So you can be done with the first 4 books and be satisfied with where you're sitting. So check them out because there will be more, but you should be caught up before then.
I heard it here, and now you have no excuse. So thanks for talking with me, Andrew, tonight. Thanks for letting me take up an hour and 20 plus, the time we were yakking before this went live. Yeah. But I appreciate it a lot. I appreciate your books, actually, quite a bit. And I am ashamed to be seeing you face to face without having read the Collation Saga yet. So
there's time.
I need to get to it, or else T from an erudite adventurer is going to get mad at me or something.
That's true.
So thanks for chatting with me, Andrew. And to everyone else, thank you so much for watching. And we'll hit end record.